Have you ever noticed how some nights feel heavier than others? When your body is still, but your thoughts keep walking? You lie in the dark, watching the slow rhythm of your own breath, and yet even that feels burdened. Each inhale carrying the weight of what you can't control. Each exhale trying to release what won't let go. It's strange how silence can feel so loud when worry fills it. You tell yourself, tomorrow will be better. But tomorrow often arrives wearing the same clothes as yesterday, draped in the same uncertainty, whispering the same questions. Will things finally fall into place? Will this prayer be answered? Will I ever feel at peace again? Worry is a quiet storm. It doesn't roar like thunder. It hums beneath everything. At work, you smile. With family, you nod. But beneath every word sits an invisible tremor, the thought that something could go wrong, that you might not be enough, that control is slipping through your fingers. We try to hold the world together with clenched fists. We plan, we calculate, we imagine every outcome, as though anxiety were the price of survival. But what if the reason you're so tired isn't because life is hard, but because you keep trying to carry what was never yours to carry? The Sufis say the heaviest load in this world is not grief or loss, it is control. For the one who tries to master destiny forgets that destiny already has a master. Think about it. When was the last time you felt truly light? Not just physically, but deep in the soul. When the heart wasn't bracing for the next blow. When you trusted the moment enough to simply breathe in peace. Most of us can't remember because we've mistaken worrying for caring. We think that if we stop worrying, we'll stop being responsible. But worry is not care. Worry is mistrust disguised as diligence. You see, the heart has two languages, trust and fear. And whichever one you speak, more often begins to shape your world. Ibn Arabi once wrote, "When the servant depends on his own will, he becomes lost in the sea of causes. But when he depends on Allah, the sea itself carries him." How many of us are still trying to swim in that sea, exhausted, gasping, when we could simply float by letting go? Maybe you've had moments like this. You tried everything, work harder, pray more, plan again, but nothing seemed to move. And then one night, worn out, you whispered, "Ya Allah, I can't do this anymore. Please, you take it." And for the first time, you slept deeply. Nothing around you changed, but inside you something softened. That wasn't weakness, that was surrender. The Prophet said, "If you rely upon Allah with true reliance, He will provide for you as He provides for the birds. They leave their nests hungry in the morning and return full in the evening. The bird doesn't sit idle, it flies, it searches, but it doesn't wake trembling in fear of the sky. It trusts the wind, so why can't we? Why do we cling to every outcome as if peace depends on it? Because the mind says, what if I fail? But the soul whispers, what if you trust? There is a moment, a sacred turning point, when the heart realizes it was never meant to control life, only to cooperate with it. That's when surrender begins. That's when rest begins. The world won't become lighter overnight. The bills will still exist. The responsibilities will remain. But something inside will shift. You'll breathe differently. You'll look at the same problem and see a different kind of order hidden within it. And maybe then, for the first time in a long while, you'll feel what Ibn Arabi meant when he said, "The real is nearer to you than your breath," because that nearness, the one who carries all things, has been holding your burdens long before you even notice their weight. We live in a world that worships control. We plan our days by the hour, chase results, measure worth by achievement. And yet, the more we try to master life, the more it slips through our hands like sand. When things fall apart, we call it failure. When plans collapse, we call it chaos. But Ibn Arabi reminds us there is no chaos in the eyes of the one who arranges all things. He wrote, "Nothing moves except by his wisdom, and if the veil of causes were lifted, you would see mercy written beneath every motion." In other words, there are no accidents, only arrangements too subtle for us to see. Look at your own life. Think of the moments that didn't go according to plan, the job that didn't come through, the person who walked away, the delay that frustrated you. At the time, you asked, "Why me?" But later, maybe years later, you realized that if that door had opened, it would have led you somewhere you weren't meant to be. If that person had stayed, you might have never learned to stand on your own. What felt like a detour was actually direction. What looked like loss was redirection in disguise. Ibn Arabi called this hidden structure tadbir ilahi, divine management. He said that what we call coincidence is simply God's handwriting, written in a language we haven't yet learned to read. The Sufis teach that every delay, every heartbreak, every misstep is part of the same orchestration, like notes in a song we only hear one measure at a time. Imagine standing too close to a painting. All you see are scattered colors, brush strokes that seem random. Step back, and a portrait emerges. Life works the same way. From where you stand, you see fragments. From where he stands, it's a masterpiece. But our impatience blinds us to that beauty. We want to see the pattern before it's woven, the meaning before it matures. And when we don't, we begin to doubt the weaver himself. That is the root of worry. Not the problem, but the perception. The ordinary mind says, things are out of control. The awakened heart replies, nothing has ever been out of his control. Ibn Arabi's wisdom asks you to look deeper, to see that the invisible is more ordered than the visible. The traffic jam that kept you from rushing into danger, the rejection that saved you from distraction, the delay that ripened your patience, even the heartbreak that forced you to remember that your worth was never tied to another's love. He wrote, "The one who knows the real sees harmony where others see conflict. He walks in storms yet feels the calm of the sea." What a line, because the truth is, life doesn't have to get easier for you to find peace. Peace is what comes when you begin to see divine order in the very places you once called disorder. Think of your own story. Can you recall a time when something didn't go your way, only for you to later say, "Now I understand why"? That understanding is a glimpse of the hidden order. The Sufis say it's like being shown a corner of the tapestry you've been standing on all along. Maybe this is what Ibn Arabi meant when he said, "The real is nearer to you than your own self." The hidden order isn't somewhere in the sky. It's woven into the fabric of every moment, waiting for the heart to quiet enough to see it. So the next time you feel abandoned by destiny, remember, you're not being punished. You're being positioned. The one who writes your story has never left his pen. And when you give your worries back to him, you'll begin to see what was there all along, not chaos, but choreography. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when exhaustion becomes revelation. It doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it comes in the quietest hour, when the mind has run out of arguments, when tears have dried, and all the advice in the world sounds hollow. You sit there, staring at nothing, and realize you've done everything you can. You've tried to fix it, prayed for it, worried over it, and still peace refuses to arrive. That moment, painful as it is sacred, because it's the point where control begins to crumble and surrender starts to bloom. A woman once told her story in a whisper. For months, she prayed for her husband's anger to soften. Each night, she cried, begging for change, for peace in her home. Nothing happened until one evening, she simply said, "Ya Allah, I can't carry this anymore, and I don't." She expected silence, but what she felt instead was relief, not because her world changed, but because her heart did. She said, "I finally stopped trying to play God." That's the moment of letting go, when your heart bows deeper than your knees ever could. It's not defeat. It's the first true act of trust. Ibn Arabi wrote, "When the servant depends fully on Allah, the path itself begins to walk toward him." In that single line lies the essence of peace. When you surrender your worry, life starts to align in ways your logic could never design. Doors open quietly, timing synchronizes, the heart feels guided, not pushed. The Sufis often compare this to a leaf in the wind. The leaf doesn't resist where it's taken. It trusts the current that carries it. That is the secret of tawakkul, reliance born not from laziness, but from love. Many fear surrender because they mistake it for passivity. But surrender doesn't mean you stop moving. It means you stop forcing. You still act, you still strive, but without the illusion that you alone control the outcome. The Prophet said, "Tie your camel and then trust in Allah." Effort is your responsibility. The result is His mercy. Think of the times in your life when things finally started to work. Not when you pushed harder, but when you softened. That conversation that unexpectedly resolved itself. That opportunity that came when you'd stopped chasing. That peace that settled after you simply said, "I leave it to you." Surrender doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start caring differently. You stop fighting what is and begin trusting what can be. You stop measuring your worth by what happens and start recognizing the wisdom in what doesn't. The moment you whisper, "Ya Allah, I trust you," something subtle shifts in the unseen. Because trust is not a thought, it's an energy that realigns your entire being. The angels themselves record it as worship. The world around you starts to respond, not because the laws of nature changed, but because your soul did. Ibn Arabi said, "The real is known through rest, not through resistance." When you resist, even blessings feel heavy. When you rest in His will, even burdens become light. Maybe that's why the Quran says, "Indeed, with hardship comes ease." The ease isn't after hardship, it's within it, waiting to be discovered by the one who stops clinging. So when you finally hand over what you can't fix, you are not giving up. You are finally giving back, returning what was never truly yours to control. And that is the turning point, the invisible moment when life starts to flow again. Not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped standing in its way. How do you know when you've truly surrendered? It's not a lightning strike or a sudden miracle. It's something quieter, something that seeps into the edges of your life until you realize the heaviness you once carried isn't as heavy anymore. It begins with small things. You stop checking your phone every few minutes, waiting for that reply. You stop rehearsing painful conversations in your head. You wake up, and instead of bracing for another fight with the day, you breathe and whisper, "Whatever comes, comes from you." That's surrender, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of trust. The Sufis say that when the heart lets go of its own designs, life begins to design itself around you, and you'll start noticing subtle signs. The right person calls at the right time, the thing you thought you lost returns in a new form, or peace settles into situations that once made you tremble. You realize that what changed wasn't the world, but your relationship with it. Science calls this the body's shift from survival to safety. When you stop fighting everything, your nervous system calms, your breath deepens, your heart rate softens. The same biology that once carried fear now carries faith. But the Sufis saw this long before any laboratory could measure it. They said, "When the heart remembers the real, the body remembers peace." It's as if your very cells sigh in relief, finally obeying the natural law of tawakkul, the law of divine trust. Consider this: a man loses his business and feels shattered. Months later, he finds himself mentoring others, discovering purpose in their healing, not his success. Or a woman's flight gets delayed, and she spends the extra hours helping a stranger who later becomes her closest friend. These are not coincidences. These are signatures of divine arrangement, the subtle fingerprints of Al-Lataf, the most gentle. Ibn Arabi said, "What you think you lost was never meant to be yours. It was only sent to teach you where to place your trust." Surrender reveals that life was never random. Every detour, every silence, every unanswered prayer is part of the choreography. The path that looked broken was never broken. It was bending toward mercy. Sometimes the signs of surrender are internal. You find yourself less reactive. You listen more. You rush less. You start seeing God not just in mosques or books, but in the small, ordinary things, in the patience of traffic lights, in the warmth of sunlight on your skin, in the laughter of a child reminding you what innocence feels like. The same world that once felt hostile now feels holy. True surrender doesn't make life perfect. It makes it clear. The fog of fear lifts. You start recognizing meaning in everything. The unanswered prayer becomes a mirror, showing you what your heart truly desires, not the thing, but the peace behind it. And here lies a paradox Ibn Arabi often spoke of. When you stop demanding signs from God, the world itself becomes a sign. Every moment becomes an ayah, a verse of the living Quran written across your days. So if you begin to feel that gentle calm, that unexplainable contentment, even when circumstances haven't changed, know that surrender has taken root. That's the moment when life stops feeling like something to fix and begins to feel like something to trust. You no longer need proof. You are the proof. A soul once drowning in worry, now floating in divine rhythm. Once the heart begins to trust, it starts to see the world differently. What once looked like random events now begins to shimmer with meaning. The Sufis call this basra, the inner sight that sees not with the eyes but with the heart. And with that sight, you begin to recognize the hidden care of the divine, the subtle touch of God's names moving quietly through your life. When you find yourself provided for in ways you didn't plan, that is Ar-Razzaq, the provider. When you are guided toward wisdom in the midst of confusion, that is al-Hakam, the wise. And when peace finds you through paths you didn't expect, that is al-Lataf, the subtle one. Each of these names is not just a title of God, but a reflection of how He relates to your life at this very moment. The names are not distant. They are alive, breathing through creation, whispering through every circumstance that touches you. Remember the time you were late to something important and grew frustrated only to realize later that delay protected you? Or when a friendship ended, and though you felt abandoned, months later, you saw how it made room for a better kind of companionship, one that nourished your soul instead of draining it? That was Al-Hakam arranging your steps. That was wisdom dressed as inconvenience. Ibn Arabi wrote, "The real hides His mercy in what you resist, so that you may seek Him beyond the surface of appearances." He meant that sometimes the care of God is disguised as hardship, because only through hardship does the heart remember its source. The Sufis say even the breaking of the heart is a form of divine intimacy, for what else could force the servant to turn back except love pulling him home? And what about those moments when help arrives so softly that it feels like coincidence? A bill you worried about suddenly paid off. A stranger's kindness arriving on the day you needed it most. That is Al-Lataf, the gentle arranger whose subtlety moves beneath your awareness like wind beneath petals, invisible, yet carrying fragrance everywhere it goes. He doesn't always answer with thunder. Sometimes He answers with timing. But we must be willing to see, because the divine is always present. It is we who are distracted. We complain that God is silent, while He speaks constantly through events, emotions, even the pauses in our lives. When the Sufis remembered the divine names, they did not just recite them, they lived them. To say Ar-Razak was to act with gratitude for provision. To say Al-Hakam was to trust the wisdom behind every turn. To say Al-Lataf was to move gently, knowing that the same tenderness guiding the stars also guides the soul. You begin to see this world as a living mirror of those names. The rain that falls, the friend who listens, the moment of rest after struggle, all of it is His care translated into form. And when you give your worries to God, you invite these names to work on your behalf. You no longer feel abandoned in your confusion. You begin to sense companionship, the kind that whispers, "You were never alone." Ibn Arabi said, "When the servant hands his affair to Allah, the real arranges it in a way the mind could never conceive." This is the hidden care, not loud, not dramatic, but perfectly timed, infinitely precise. So when life feels uncertain, look closer. You might find the trace of Al-Lataf in the delay, Ar-Razak in the unexpected gift, and Al-Hakam in the lesson that took time to unfold. Because when you hand your worries to God, you don't stop being human. You simply start being carried by the one who has always cared for you in ways too subtle, too wise, and too loving to ever fail. Once you've tasted surrender, the real work begins, living in it. It's easy to trust God in moments of revelation, when peace floods your chest and everything makes sense. But what about the morning after, when the world returns with its noise, when the email still hasn't come, when the test result still hasn't changed? That's where real tawakkul, living trust, begins. The Sufis say the difference between a believer and a worrier is not what they face, but how they walk through it. The worrier moves with clenched fists, the believer with open palms. The worrier demands proof, the believer breathes patience. Because trust is not a one-time act. It's a way of being. Think of a farmer planting a seed. He doesn't shout at the soil for being slow. He waters it, he waits, and he trusts the unseen rain. That's what faith looks like: effort without anxiety, motion without obsession. You tie your camel as the prophet taught, and then you rest. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've stopped controlling. Ibn Arabi wrote, "The one who relies upon Allah does not seek to hasten what has its appointed hour. He is reminding you, what is meant for you will not miss you. Even delay has its rhythm. It's the language of divine precision." In everyday life, this means showing up fully, but leaving the results in His hands. When you send that application, you do your best and release the outcome. When you pray for healing, you seek the means and let the cure arrive in its own form. When you love someone sincerely, you give your all. And if they must leave, you trust that it too is a form of protection. This is the freedom of the heart that trusts. You act, but you don't attach. You move, but you don't cling. You strive, but you don't beg for control. Modern life has taught us that peace is found in having more control, but Sufi wisdom whispers the opposite. Peace begins when you stop needing control to feel safe. Because control is an illusion, a mirage that keeps you running in circles. The one who lives with trust is no longer haunted by what if. They are anchored by even if. Even if things don't go as planned, I will be okay. Even if my prayers take longer, I will keep believing. Even if my path bends unexpectedly, I will walk it with grace. There is a quiet dignity in such trust, a calm strength that others mistake for luck, but is really surrender. People will wonder how you remain steady while everything shifts around you. They won't see the secret, that your balance doesn't come from standing on solid ground, but from being held by the one who never moves. The Quran reminds us, "And whoever relies upon Allah, then He is sufficient for him." Sufficient, not partial, not uncertain, enough. The heart that truly believes this stops grasping for proof because it feels provision before it arrives. Living with trust means you no longer measure God's love by outcomes. You stop saying, "He answered" or "He didn't." You begin to see that He always answers, sometimes with what you asked for, sometimes with something deeper: patience, purification, protection. The saints of Sufism used to say, the true sign of faith is calm after effort. It's the stillness that follows sincere action, the peace that doesn't depend on success. So as you walk through life, carry this rhythm. Act with love, surrender the result, and let peace be your witness. For the one who truly trusts does not chase miracles. Miracles begin to chase them. There comes a time when the heart, once restless and crowded with worry, begins to quiet. Not because the storms have stopped, but because you've stopped trying to command the wind. You still feel the world's movement, but it no longer shakes you as it once did. You've entered what Ibn Arabi called sukun al-qalb, the stillness of the heart that trusts. This peace doesn't announce itself. It arrives softly, like dawn light spilling across the floor after a long night. You start noticing that the same problems no longer carry the same weight. The same fears visit, but they no longer take residence. You breathe differently, you speak slower, you smile more easily. You don't rush to solve everything because you've learned that not every question needs an immediate answer. Not every pain requires a plan. The Sufis say that the greatest miracle is not walking on water, but walking on earth with a tranquil heart. To wake up in a world of uncertainty and still whisper, Alhamdulillah. To walk through the same streets, carry the same responsibilities, and yet feel a hidden gentleness guiding every step. This is the miracle of surrender. You begin to realize that nothing external has changed, yet everything inside has. The peace you searched for wasn't waiting in some distant future. It was buried beneath the rubble of your own resistance. When you stopped clinging, peace rose from underneath like water returning to the surface. Ibn Arabi wrote, "When you cease to oppose the current of destiny, you find that destiny itself begins to carry you." That's what happens when you give your worries to God. The same situations that once felt unbearable become manageable. The same people who once tested you become teachers. Even pain begins to reveal purpose. And as your trust deepens, your perception shifts. You no longer call things good or bad. You simply call them His. For the one who truly surrenders, every moment, joy or trial, becomes an encounter with the divine. Even silence feels like a conversation. You start to hear it in the rhythm of your breath. Inhale, He gives. Exhale, you return. Every breath becomes dhikr. Every moment becomes prayer. This is not escape from the world. It is engagement with it through a purified heart. You notice that peace is no longer fragile. It doesn't depend on whether life behaves. It stays. It abides. It holds you through both laughter and loss. That is when you realize giving your worries to God was never about changing your circumstances. It was about transforming your sight. Because what you see determines how you live. And when you see divine order everywhere, life becomes worship. So tonight, as you rest, place your hand on your heart and whisper, Ya Allah, what I cannot control, I entrust to you. What I cannot understand, I leave in your wisdom. What I cannot carry, I return to your mercy. Then breathe and feel how the same air that sustains your life has always been His gift, unseen, effortless, constant. This is the peace that follows surrender, not the end of problems, but the end of pretending you face them alone. And perhaps that's what Ibn Arabi meant when he said, "The real is known through rest, not resistance." For when the heart finally rests in Him, everything else begins to move as it was always meant to. So tonight, when the world quiets and you feel the pull of your thoughts again, pause for a moment. Don't chase another answer. Don't replay the past or try to outthink tomorrow. Just breathe and remember that peace isn't something you must earn. It's what returns when you finally hand your worries back to the one who was never worried to begin with. Whisper it softly, Ya Allah, I leave my burdens in your hands. You are my rest, my refuge, my reason to keep going. Because when you give your worries to God, everything doesn't magically fix itself. You begin to align with the way everything was already working. You begin to live with the rhythm of trust instead of the noise of fear. And that's when life, in all its mystery, starts to move with you instead of against you. Have you ever seen that happen in your own life? A moment when you let go and suddenly everything began to make sense? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there might need your reminder tonight. If this message touched your heart, help spread it. Like, subscribe, and share this reflection with someone who needs peace right now. And as you do, remember, peace doesn't arrive when everything is perfect. It arrives when you remember who's been perfect all along. Until next time, this is Voice of Sufism, where every story leads you back to the one who never left.